She's just a college dropout. What could she possibly say in court except make herself look worse? That was what her own family whispered as they took their seats in a Manitoba courtroom, fully expecting to watch her be shamed in public. But minutes later, when the Crown prosecutor rose and identified her as the primary victim in a long-running identity theft case, the people who had mocked her were the ones who went still in their seats. Before we get into today's story, I want to ask you something. If a family kept treating one daughter like a disgrace while praising the other no matter what she did, which one would you trust less from the beginning? Type, "I'm here," and the city you're watching from in the comments, and tell me whether you would have stayed quiet or fought back sooner. And for everyone who keeps coming back, liking, and subscribing, may God give you peace in your home, clarity in your mind, and strength when people underestimate you. Thank you for being here with me. Now let me tell you exactly how it all happened. My name is Willow, and for most of my life, I was the daughter nobody in my family liked talking about unless they were using me as a warning. I grew up in Manitoba in a town where everybody knew everybody's business by the time the snow on the sidewalks turned gray. My father, Jason, cared a lot about appearances. My mother, Yasmin, cared even more. My younger sister, Zara, was their pride, their proof that they had done everything right. She was polished, charming, pretty in that effortless way people like to praise in front of others, and she had a talent for making any story sound better when she was the one telling it. Then there was me. I had started university in Winnipeg when I was 19. I really thought I was going to make something of myself the way teachers always told me I would. I loved classes, loved the library, loved the feeling that maybe my life would stretch beyond our small house, beyond my mother's sharp voice and my father's disappointment. But halfway through my second year, my grandmother on my mother's side got sick. She had no one who could stay with her full time. My mother kept saying it was temporary, just until things settled down, just until they could figure out home care, just until Zara finished a busy semester and could help more. Temporary turned into permanent. I deferred one term, then another. I moved back home, picked up shifts at a grocery store pharmacy counter, and spent my nights sorting medication, heating soup, changing bedding, and helping my grandmother to the bathroom when her legs were too weak to hold her. By the time she passed, I had lost my place at school, my savings, and most of my confidence. Not once did my family ever tell that version of the story. The version they told people was much shorter and much crueler. Willow dropped out. They loved saying it at gatherings in the kind of voice people use when they're pretending not to judge. Not loud enough to be called rude, but loud enough that everyone around the table could hear it. She never really had the discipline for university. She gets overwhelmed easily. She's sweet, but she's not exactly academic. Some girls just aren't built for that kind of life. My mother especially liked that last one. She would say it with a little shrug, as if my whole life had simply followed its natural limit. At first I tried to correct people. I would explain about my grandmother. I would say I left to help the family. But every time I did, my mother would smile and say, "We all made sacrifices, Willow. There's no need to dramatize it." That word stayed with me. Dramatize. In my family, any time I told the truth, and the truth made them look bad, I was dramatic. If I said Zara never helped with grandma, I was dramatic. If I said Dad used my paycheck to cover bills and promised to pay me back but never did, I was dramatic. If I said Mom introduced Zara as our successful daughter and me as our sensitive one at church lunch after church lunch, I was dramatic. So after a while, I stopped defending myself. It was easier to let people think what they wanted than to keep bleeding in public. I lived in the basement suite of my parents' house long after most people my age had moved on. It wasn't really a proper suite, more like a half-finished lower level with a small bedroom, a worn sofa, and one narrow window that let in a strip of light during the day. I paid rent when I could. I helped with groceries. I kept to myself. I worked different administrative jobs over the years: reception, filing, inventory support, customer service. Nothing glamorous, but steady enough when the contracts lasted. Zara, on the other hand, finished college, then rebranded herself every 6 months like it was a hobby. One year she was in marketing, the next she was building a financial consulting brand, then she was involved in entrepreneurial projects that none of us fully understood. She dressed well, spoke confidently, and posted carefully edited photos from coffee shops in Winnipeg, Toronto, and sometimes Calgary, as if she were constantly on the edge of a bigger life. My parents adored that about her. She has ambition, my father would say. She knows how to carry herself, my mother would add. I knew another side of Zara, though. I knew how she entered rooms already prepared to lie. I knew how she borrowed, without asking. I knew how she opened my makeup, wore my sweaters, took cash out of my bag, and then stared straight at me when I asked where it went. "Why would I steal from you?" she would say, offended. "Do you hear yourself?" And somehow I would be the one apologizing by the end of the conversation. The first time I got a strange call about money, I thought it was a scam. I was 28, on my lunch break, sitting in my car outside a Tim Hortons with a steeping tea getting cold in the cup holder. A man asked if he was speaking to Willow Harris. I said yes. He asked if I was aware that my payment on a personal loan was now more than 60 days overdue. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd that my brain didn't know what else to do. "I think you have the wrong person," I said. He confirmed my date of birth. He confirmed part of my address history. He confirmed the last 3 digits of my social insurance number. My hand tightened around the phone. "No," I said more quietly. "I never took out a personal loan." There was a pause on the line, then that polite, suspicious tone people use when they think you're lying badly. "Well, Ms. Harris, this account was opened under your name. If there has been fraud, you'll need to report that." By the end of the call, I was shaking. I sat in that parking lot staring through the windshield while people in winter jackets hurried in and out of the coffee shop with donuts and trays of drinks, living perfectly normal afternoons while mine had started slipping sideways. That night, I told my parents. I should have known better. My father didn't even look up right away from the news on TV. "Then you must have signed something without reading it." I didn't sign anything. My mother folded a dish towel and gave me a tired look. "Willow, companies don't just hand out loans to random people. If your name is on it, there's obviously some reason." "I'm telling you there isn't." Zara leaned against the kitchen counter scrolling through her phone. "You always panic before you know the facts." I turned to her. "I'm not panicking. Someone used my information." She shrugged. "Then go deal with it." "Why are you acting like we can fix it?" "Because you're my family," I wanted to say. Because maybe for once I wanted someone in this house to look alarmed on my behalf. Because maybe I wanted one person to say, "Willow, this is serious. Sit down. Let's figure it out." Instead, my mother sighed. "Please do not start creating a scene at dinner." I looked around the kitchen table, at the roast chicken, the peas, the glow of the light above us, my father chewing as if this conversation bored him, Zara flicking her nail against her phone case, and something in me went cold. It wasn't just that they didn't believe me. It was that none of them seemed surprised. I tried to tell myself I was imagining that part. Over the next few weeks, more letters came. One from a lender I'd never heard of. One from a credit card company. One addressed to me at a mailing variation I never used, but still close enough to be mine that it made my stomach drop. I started hiding the envelopes in a file folder in my room because I didn't want my mother getting to them first. That sounds paranoid, but in our house, privacy was treated like disrespect. My mother opened mail by accident, more than once if she thought it concerned the household. Zara wandered into my room whenever she wanted, if I forgot to lock it. And my father believed anything under his roof was his business. I ordered my credit report at the public library because I didn't trust the home computer. I still remember the sound of the printer. Each sheet came out with that dry mechanical rhythm while I stood there praying I had misunderstood everything. I hadn't. There were accounts I didn't recognize. A line of credit, 2 credit cards, a small loan, then another larger loan application inquiry that had been made months earlier. My chest felt so tight I had to sit down in one of those plastic library chairs for a minute and press my palm against my sternum. I remember a child laughing somewhere in the next aisle and the hum of the heating system overhead, and I remember thinking, this is real. This is really happening. Somebody built another life in my name while I was busy surviving my own. I went to the bank first. The woman at the branch in Brandon was kind but guarded. Her name tag said Adriana. She invited me into a small office with frosted glass and asked me to explain everything from the beginning. I did my best. I told her about the calls, the letters, the report. I told her I never opened these accounts. She typed for a long time. Then she frowned. What? I asked. There have been multiple authentication attempts connected to your profile over the last year. I don't understand what that means. It means someone had enough of your identifying information to answer security questions and access account services. I stared at her. Do you know anyone who would have your SIN, old addresses, date of birth, banking details? I actually almost laughed again, except this time nothing was funny. My family knew all of that. Not just my family, really. My mother had kept everyone's important documents in a filing cabinet for years. Birth certificates, tax slips, passport copies, insurance papers, old school forms. Even when I was an adult, she acted like she was the administrator of all our lives. If I needed an old T4 or immunization record, she was the one who knew where it was. She liked that. She liked being the keeper of things. And Zara had access to everything in that house. I heard myself say, maybe. Adriana looked up. Maybe someone you know? I don't want to accuse anyone without proof. That's understandable, she said. But if this is identity theft, you need to document everything. Freeze what you can. File a police report. And do not ignore any correspondence. She printed a list of steps for me, highlighted a few lines, and handed it over. Our fingers brushed, and for a second I almost cried from the simple kindness of being treated like someone worth helping. When I got home, my mother was in the foyer arranging flowers in a ceramic vase. You're late, she said. I went to the bank. She kept adjusting stems. And they said it looks like someone had enough of my information to access accounts. She finally looked at me. So this is fraud. She gave a small, impatient laugh. Willow, don't say fraud, as if you're in some crime show. There's probably a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding. Zara came in from the garage carrying shopping bags. What's not a misunderstanding? I looked at her face. Perfectly smooth, perfectly curious, and something fluttered low in my stomach. Fear, maybe. Or recognition. The bank said someone used my information, I said. She rolled her eyes. Again with this? Again? I repeated. Yes, again. Because this is my name, Zara. My father walked in behind her, smelling like cold air and gasoline. What now? Before I could answer, Zara sighed like I was exhausting. She thinks some mystery criminal built a financial empire with her identity. I stared at her. That's not what I said. Then what did you say? I said someone used my information. My father dropped his keys in the bowl by the door. Then go to the police if you're so sure. But stop accusing people in this house with those looks. I hadn't accused anyone. Not out loud. But I realized then that the possibility had already entered the room, and they were swatting it away too fast. That night, I went through the filing cabinet while everyone slept. My mother kept it in the office off the dining room, a small room that always smelled like paper and dust and lavender hand cream. I used the flashlight on my phone so I wouldn't have to turn on the lamp. Inside the drawers were labeled folders arranged with a level of neatness she never extended to anything emotional. Taxes, insurance, medical, school, property. I found my folder. It was thinner than I expected. My birth certificate copy was there. Old report cards, a passport photocopy, some expire health paperwork. But my SIN confirmation letter copy, which I knew had been there years ago, was gone. So were a couple of old bank forms. I checked again, slower this time, my fingers trembling. Gone. The next morning, I asked my mother while she buttered toast. Did you move any of my documents out of the filing cabinet? She didn't even blink. Why would I? Because some things are missing. No, they aren't. You haven't even checked. She set the knife down too hard. Willow, I am not starting my day with one of your paranoid accusations. My father glanced over his coffee mug. Enough. I looked at Zara. Did you take anything from that cabinet? She gave a laugh too bright to be real. You really have lost it. There it was again. Lost it. Crazy. Dramatic. Paranoid. Every word designed to turn me into the problem before anyone had to answer a direct question. I went to work with a headache, so bad it made my vision pulse. At lunch, I sat in my car and called the non-emergency police line. The woman who took the report was practical and calm. She asked for dates, institutions, account numbers, document history, suspected access points. I answered as much as I could. She told me to gather all related mail, printouts, and communication records. She said an investigator might contact me if the file expanded. I expected to feel better after that. Instead, I felt worse, because making it official meant admitting I wasn't imagining things. After that, life inside the house changed in tiny ways that would have looked meaningless to anyone else. Doors closed when I entered rooms. Conversations stopped. My mother started asking strange questions in a too casual voice. Did you tell your work about this? Did you mention our address? Did you put Zara's name anywhere in that report? Always phrased as concern, never sounding like concern. Zara became sweeter in a way that made me deeply uneasy. She would bring me coffee downstairs. She would ask if I was sleeping okay. She would sit on the arm of the sofa and say things like, stress can really distort memory, right? I'm worried about you. One night, she came into my room holding folded laundry that wasn't hers to touch. I know you think I don't support you, she said softly, but I'm on your side. I stood up from my desk. Then tell me you didn't use my information. Her expression changed so fast I almost missed it. 1 second warm, the next flat. That's insulting. Then answer. I don't owe you an answer to something disgusting. Disgusting? Yes, disgusting. Do you know how bitter you sound? You never got over the fact that I moved forward and you didn't. I felt heat crawl up my neck. This isn't about that. It's always about that with you, she snapped. The second something goes wrong, you need someone prettier, smarter, and more successful to blame. I was so stunned I couldn't speak for a second. Then she shook her head, let out a laugh with no humor in it, and placed the laundry on my bed. You need help, Willow. After she left, I sat there staring at the folded towels until I realized my hands were shaking. That line stayed with me because it was so practiced, not spontaneous, not wounded. Practiced. A week later, a detective called. His name was Derek. He said there were patterns across the complaints and accounts attached to my report that suggested this wasn't a single incident. He asked whether anyone close to me had repeated access to my mail, ID documents, banking app, share devices, or home address history. He also asked if anyone in my family had sudden unexplained income, debts, or lifestyle changes. My mind went immediately to Zara's designer coats, the trips she never seemed able to afford, the expensive skincare packages arriving by courier, the way she always had money for nails and brunch and gas, and yet still borrowed from everybody. But suspicion wasn't proof. I don't know, I said. I just know my family has always treated me like I'm not credible. There was silence on the line for a moment. Then Derek said, sometimes that's useful to the person doing the fraud. That sentence ran through me like ice water. Sometimes that's useful. Of course it was. Who would the bank believe more? Who would a lender believe more? Who would extended family believe more? My polished younger sister with her neat coat, white smile, and smooth voice? Or me, the college dropout daughter still living in the basement? My whole reputation had been prepared in advance. Not by accident, by design. I started noticing things I should have noticed sooner. Zara knew details about my finances that I never shared. Once, while my parents and I were arguing about rent, she smirked and said, well, maybe if you didn't live paycheck to paycheck, you wouldn't be so stressed. I had never told her what was in my account. Another time, she mocked the balance on a card I only used for recurring bills. She said it casually, then quickly acted like she was guessing. At the time I told myself, maybe I had mentioned it in passing, but I hadn't. Then there was the mail. Twice I found opened envelopes from financial institutions in the kitchen recycling bin before I had even seen them. My mother insisted she had opened them by mistake. Zara said all government mail looked the same. Both explanations felt too convenient. I began taking photos of everything. Letters, dates, missing files, screenshots of account alerts, even the recycling bin. I bought a cheap accordion folder and kept it hidden inside an old winter boot box under my bed. Every night after work, I added one more paper, one more note, one more small piece of the life somebody had been stealing from me. At the same time, my mother increased the pressure in a different direction. "You cannot embarrass this family with wild allegations," she said one Saturday morning while she wiped the already clean kitchen counter. "I'm trying to protect myself. By dragging us into it? No one dragged you into anything unless you have something to worry about." She turned around so sharply the dishcloth slipped from her hand. "How dare you?" There it was. Not denial. Offense. The kind of offense people perform when they want to redirect the room. "I'm not accusing you," I said carefully. "But you want to," she shot back. "Because in this family, whenever you fail, you need someone else to carry the blame." I felt my whole body go rigid. Whenever you fail. That was the center of everything with her. Not what happened. Not what was true. Just whether she could place me beneath everyone else before I opened my mouth. My father entered halfway through, heard enough to understand conflict, but not enough to understand content, and immediately sided with her. "Apologize to your mother," he said. "For what?" "For the tone." I looked from him to her, then toward the hallway where Zara stood partly hidden, listening with that unreadable expression she used when something was going her way. I did not apologize. It was a small thing, but in our house it felt like kicking open a locked door. From that point on, I became the difficult one openly, not just privately. My mother stopped saving me dinner if I worked late. My father told me I was making the home tense. Zara started dropping little remarks in front of relatives. "She's under a lot of stress. We're trying to be patient." It's sad, honestly. The cruelty of that kind of sentence is hard to explain unless you've lived with it. Nothing in it sounds openly abusive. In fact, to outsiders it sounds caring. But it creates a shape around you. It builds a version of you that other people accept before you even speak. By Christmas, I could feel extended families studying me differently. We gathered at my aunt's house just outside Portage La Prairie. Snow clung to boots in the mudroom, and the windows fogged from the heat of cooking. The adults crowded around the island with wine glasses. A hockey game murmured from the living room TV. Someone's baby fussed upstairs. Normal family noise. Normal family food. Normal family performance. My mother was in excellent form. She told one cousin that Zara was doing consulting work and had such a strong professional instinct. Then she touched my arm and said, "And Willow is still figuring things out." Still. At 30. In front of everybody. I wanted to disappear. Later, when I went upstairs to use the bathroom, I heard voices from the guest room with the door cracked open. My mother and Zara. I would have walked away, but then I heard my name. "She has no proof," my mother was saying. Zara replied in a low voice I couldn't fully catch. Then my mother again, sharper this time. "Well then stop using that card until this settles." I froze. My pulse pounded so hard in my ears it blurred the next few words. I only caught pieces. "Too late now." She already filed. "Dad can't know everything." I stepped back so quickly my shoulder brushed the hallway table and knocked a framed photo crooked. The voices inside stopped. I rushed into the bathroom and locked the door, then stood there with my hands over my mouth. I knew what I had heard. Not every word, but enough. Enough to understand that whatever was happening, my mother knew more than she admitted. Enough to understand Zara had used at least one card. Enough to know I was not crazy. When I came downstairs, the room felt tilted. My mother smiled at me from across the kitchen, as if nothing had happened. Zara passed me a plate of dessert and asked if I wanted pecan pie. I took the plate because my hands needed something to do. That night, back in the basement, I wrote everything down while it was still fresh.
Date, time,
location, exact phrases, even the smell of cinnamon and roast turkey in the hallway, because I wanted to remember I hadn't dreamed it. A few days later, Detective Derek called again. He said some subpoenas were in process for records related to the fraudulent accounts. He couldn't tell me everything yet, but he asked whether anyone in my household had access to my old school paperwork, tax records, and government correspondence. "Yes," I said. "Who?" "My mother. My sister." Probably my father too, if he ever cared to look. He exhaled. Okay. That one word told me more than he meant to. Something was moving. The first truly public humiliation came in February. My parents insisted I join them for Sunday dinner because my father's friend from church was visiting with his son, Evan, who had recently come back from Edmonton and was, according to my mother, doing very well for himself. I did not want to be there. But in families like mine, refusing dinner becomes its own accusation. So I wore a navy sweater, put on mascara, and came upstairs. At first things were tolerable. The friend was kind. Evan was quiet, decent, probably as uncomfortable as I was. We talked about weather, road conditions, grocery prices, and how brutal Manitoba winters were when the wind picked up across open roads. I almost relaxed. Then the conversation shifted the way it always did. My mother asked Evan about his engineering work. My father praised his discipline. Zara talked about professional branding and said she loved connecting with serious people who had drive. Then my father's friend smiled at me and said, "And what about you, Willow? Your mother says you've had an interesting path." There is no graceful way to answer that when you know you've already been discussed before you entered the room. I work in admin, I said. Mostly contract positions. My mother gave a little laugh. She's had a hard time settling because she never finished school. The room went warm around my face. I forced a smile. I left to take care of Grandma. Yes, my mother said lightly, but the point is, university wasn't the right fit in the end. Not the right fit. As if I had simply failed the audition for a better life. I put my fork down. That's not what happened. My father looked at me in warning. Willow. But I couldn't stop. Something in me had been raw for too long. I left because no one else would help, I said. I left because this family needed me, and then you all acted like I quit because I was lazy. Silence hit the table, so suddenly it felt physical. My mother's face hardened. Zara stared at me like I was feral. My father's friend cleared his throat. Then Zara, sweet as poison, said, "This is exactly what we mean." She rewrites everything when she feels insecure. I turned to her. I am not insecure. I am tired of being lied about. She leaned back. And now you're spiraling in front of guests. That word again. Spiraling. The modern, polished cousin of crazy. My father stood up from the table. Enough. You will not ruin dinner because you can't manage your emotions. I stood too fast, my chair scraping the floor. My emotions are not the problem in this house. My mother looked embarrassed in that performative way she saved for outsiders. Please forgive this. Willow has been under stress because of some financial confusion. Financial confusion. I could barely breathe. I walked out before I started crying in front of them. I grabbed my coat, drove to the riverfront, and sat in my car under a sky the color of dirty steel while the heater clicked and the windshield slowly fogged. That was the night I finally stopped hoping my family would choose me if the truth came out. They had already chosen. They would protect the image of the family before they protected the daughter inside it. After that, I spoke less and prepared more. I changed passwords. I rented a small post office box for sensitive mail. I redirected what I could. I met Adriana at the bank again and brought more documentation. This time, she printed a timeline of suspicious account actions that made my stomach lurch. Some logins and applications matched times when I had been at work, clocked in, nowhere near a computer except under office camera coverage. That helps you, she said. Does it?
Yes.
It establishes you were unlikely to be the one initiating those steps. She slid the paper toward me. I stared at the rows of dates and times. One application had been submitted on a Tuesday afternoon while I was covering front reception at a dental clinic in Brandon. I remembered that day.
Snowstorm.
Late patients. A crying toddler in a red snowsuit. I had been so busy, I barely drank water. While I was doing that, someone had been using my life like a tool. Another key piece came by accident. I was upstairs one evening when Zara left her laptop open on the dining table and went to take a call outside. I was only passing through for tea, but a notification popped up in the corner of the screen before it dimmed. It was from a debt consolidation service. My eyes locked on the preview. Then on the email beneath it, the subject line included a partial reference number. And below that, in the visible inbox list, I saw my own name, not as the sender, in the subject line. I should have walked away. I know that. But by then I felt like I had spent months being morally careful while somebody else lived off my caution. So I stepped closer. I didn't open anything. I didn't need to. The inbox itself told me enough. There were messages from lenders, document request reminders, verification notices, and one subject line that made the room spin. Urgent. Willow Harris account review. I heard the back door slide open and moved away just as Zara came in. She took one look at my face and knew. For a second the mask dropped completely. Then she smiled. What? I couldn't even pretend. Why is my name in your email? She set her phone on the counter, very gently. You went through my laptop? I saw the screen. You were snooping. Why is my name in your email? She crossed her arms. You are unbelievable. That's not an answer. It's work-related. What work? She laughed. Not everybody needs to explain their career to you. I looked her straight in the eye. Did you use my identity? Her expression turned cold enough to sting. Be very careful, Willow. That sentence chilled me more than if she had shouted. Not deny it.
Not how could you think that?
Be very careful. I went downstairs and locked my door. Then I emailed Detective Derek everything I had observed. I was careful with the wording. I said I had seen suspicious lender-related correspondence on a household member's laptop containing my name and reference language that appeared connected to the unauthorized accounts. I attached photos of my timeline notes and the bank records Adriana had given me. He replied the next day, asking to meet. We met in a plain interview room at the local detachment office. Gray table, 2 chairs, a box of tissues no one ever wanted to touch. I told him about the missing documents, the overheard Christmas conversation, the open emails, the family reaction, the way they kept trying to make me sound unstable. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he folded his hands and said, I need you to understand something. People who commit this kind of fraud often rely on familiarity. They count on access, yes, but they also count on social cover. If everyone around you has been trained to see you as irresponsible, that narrative can shield the real offender. I sat very still, because hearing it from him changed something in me. Up to that point, I had still been carrying some small rotten piece of shame, the one my family had planted there years ago. The part that kept asking, what if they're right about me? What if no one believes me because I really do look like a mess from the outside? But across from that detective in that plain room, my life started making a different kind of sense. I hadn't just been belittled. I had been prepared, conditioned to doubt myself, presented to the world as a convenient liar, a disappointment, a dropout who couldn't keep track of her own life. That image was not collateral damage. It was camouflage. And somebody in my family had been hiding behind it. The official collapse came sooner than I expected. One Thursday evening in March, my father told me both he and my mother needed to speak with me upstairs as a family. The phrase alone made me nauseous. In our house, as a family, usually meant an organized effort to blame me for something I hadn't caused. When I entered the dining room, all 3 of them were already seated. My mother sat straight-backed with her hands folded. My father had a manila envelope in front of him. Zara looked almost serene. Every instinct in my body told me to leave, but I stayed. What is this? I asked. My father tapped the envelope. A solution. I didn't sit down. To what? To this situation you've created, my mother said. I let out a short, disbelieving laugh. I created? Yes, Zara cut in. By escalating everything and making reckless accusations. I looked from one face to the next. You mean by reporting that someone stole my identity? My father's jaw tightened. Watch your tone. There's that word again, I said.
Tone.
Always tone. Never facts. My mother slid a paper toward me. We spoke to someone. For everyone's sake, the best thing would be for you to acknowledge that you mishandled your information and overreacted under stress. Then this whole thing can settle privately. I picked up the paper. It was not a legal confession, not exactly, but close enough to make me sick. A typed statement. Careless document storage. Emotional distress. Possible confusion regarding voluntary financial arrangements. Voluntary financial arrangements. I looked up slowly. What is this? My father answered. A way to stop you from destroying this family's reputation. I could hear my own heartbeat. So, you want me to sign something saying this is my fault? My mother's voice turned gentler, which always meant more danger, not less. No one is saying fault. We're saying mistakes happen. You've been under pressure for years. We understand that. But if you keep pushing this fantasy that someone in this house targeted you, you will ruin Zara's future too. There it was. Not if you keep lying. Not if you're mistaken. If you keep pushing this. Zara's future too. I stared at her. She met my eyes and did not look away. And, in that moment I knew. I still didn't have every document, every record, every piece. But I knew. Maybe my mother hadn't started it. Maybe my father didn't fully understand the mechanics. But Zara had done it and my mother was trying to bury it, and my father cared more about public shame than criminal truth. I set the paper down. No. My father's voice dropped. Think carefully. I have. You live in this house. Yes, I said. And I pay to live in the basement of a house where my own family thinks I should sign away my credibility to protect the person who did this to me. My mother's eyes flashed. How dare you say that about your sister? How dare you ask me to lie? Zara stood up then, finally losing her softness. No one needs your credibility. You barely have any. That landed exactly where she meant it to. The dropout. The unreliable one. The daughter people whispered about. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, and I hated that they could still do that to me, still pull pain up from somewhere so old it felt built into my bones. But I did not cry. Instead, I said the one thing I had never said clearly in that room before. You built this whole family around making me look small. And now you're panicking because it won't work forever. Silence. Real silence.
Not the staged kind.
Not the offended kind. The kind that comes when someone accidentally tells the truth too directly. My father recovered first. He pushed the envelope toward me. If you won't cooperate, you can leave. I looked at him. You're kicking me out? I'm telling you this home cannot function with this level of hostility. Hostility. The word almost made me laugh. Their theft was conflict. My reaction was hostility. My mother folded her arms. Perhaps some distance will help you calm down. I looked at each of them one last time. At Zara, with her perfect posture and borrowed innocence. At my mother, with her polished cruelty. At my father, who could have stopped so much if he had ever cared more about truth than image. Then I picked up neither the pen nor the paper. Fine, I said. I'll go. I went downstairs, pulled 2 suitcases from the closet, and started packing with hands that felt half numb.
Clothes.
Folder of evidence. Work shoes. Laptop. Winter coat.
Charger.
Prescription bottle. Framed photo of my grandmother. I left behind the blankets my mother bought on sale, the cheap lamp from the living room, the old dishes that technically belonged to the house. I took only what was mine, because even then I knew they would accuse me of theft if I gave them the chance. Halfway through packing, I heard a knock on my half-open door. Zara leaned against the frame. You're being dramatic, she said quietly. I zipped one suitcase. Get out. She didn't move. You know no one is going to believe you over me. I finally turned to face her. The look on her face was not angry. It was confident. That terrified me more than rage would have. Then she smiled just a little and said, You should have stayed in your lane. I will never forget that sentence. Not because it was clever. Because it was honest. It told me everything her family mask had tried to hide. This was not panic. This was entitlement. This was a woman who truly believed my life existed for her use. I picked up my phone, held it at my side, and prayed the voice memo app had actually started when I touched it a second earlier in my pocket. Say that again, I said. Her smile vanished. She stepped back. You're insane. Then she walked away. I didn't know yet if the recording had caught enough. I didn't know whether that one line would matter legally.
But I saved the file anyway.
At 10:30 that night, I loaded my suitcases into my car, while snow drifted across the driveway in thin silver lines under the porch light.
No one came out to help.
No one asked where I would sleep. No one said this had gone too far. My father only opened the front door once to call, "Return your house key."
So I did.
I set it on the porch railing and drove away with my vision blurred and my whole chest aching, heading toward a cheap extended stay motel outside town because it was the only place I could afford on short notice. I should have felt broken. And I was broken in some ways. But beneath the grief, beneath the humiliation, beneath the cold shock of being thrown out by my own family over a crime committed against me, another feeling had begun to live. Certainty. For the first time in my life, I was no longer trying to win love from people committed to misunderstanding me. For the first time, I understood that what they feared was not my instability. It was my clarity. And as I parked outside that motel with 2 suitcases, a file box of evidence, and almost no money left, I realized the worst thing they had ever done to me might also become the thing that finally forced the truth into the open. Before I continue, I want to ask you something else. Have you ever noticed how the person who gets called too emotional is usually the one telling the truth nobody wants to hear? Tell me in the comments whether you think silence protects a family or only protects the guilty, because honestly, what happened next still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. The motel rooms smelled like industrial detergent and old heat. The carpet had that flattened look that told you too many people had passed through it carrying too much pain, too much luggage, too many things they never thought they'd have to leave behind. I sat on the edge of the bed in my coat for nearly an hour after I arrived, staring at the floral bedspread, my phone in one hand and my evidence folder in the other, trying not to fall apart. That was the strange thing about hitting bottom. You imagine it as one giant dramatic moment, but for me it was quieter than that. It was the sound of the mini fridge humming in the corner. It was the ache in my lower back from carrying suitcases up icy steps. It was realizing I had nobody to call at midnight without feeling like a burden. I did cry eventually. Not neatly either. I cried hard enough that my throat hurt and my eyes swelled, and I had to hold a towel over my face so the people in the next room wouldn't hear me. I cried for the obvious things, being kicked out, being betrayed, being used, but I also cried for older things. For every time I had apologized when I was the one being hurt. For every family gathering where I had swallowed humiliation just to keep the peace. For every version of myself that had kept hoping love would suddenly arrive if I became easier, quieter, smaller. By morning I felt hollowed out. I took a shower, tied my hair back, put on the cleanest blouse I had unpacked, and went to work as if my life had not been ripped open 12 hours earlier. That day at the medical office where I was doing a temporary admin contract, I smiled at patients, answered calls, scanned forms, and booked follow-ups while feeling like my body had become some kind of machine I was remotely operating. On my lunch break, I sat in my car and checked my account balance. After the motel payment, gas, and 2 automatic withdrawals I hadn't planned for, the number left on the screen made my chest tighten. I could not survive like this for long. That afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number. It was short. "You need to stop before you make this worse for yourself." No name. No signature. Nothing I could prove. But I knew. I sat there staring at the message until the screen dimmed. Then I took a screenshot and saved it to 3 places. That evening, instead of going back to the motel right away, I drove to the parking lot of a grocery store and called the only person I could think of who might still see me as more than the role my family had assigned me. Her name was Bianca. We had been close in high school, drifted when life pulled us in different directions, and reconnected now and then through social media. She lived in Winnipeg now and worked in payroll for a transportation company. We weren't the kind of friends who talked every day, but she was one of the few people from my past who had always looked at me directly, not through whatever story my mother had prepared. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Willow." The second I heard her voice, I almost lost the ability to speak. "Hi," I said, and it came out strained. There was a pause. What happened? That question broke me more than any grand speech could have. Because she didn't ask what's wrong like people do when they want the summary. She asked what happened like she already understood that something had been done to me. So I told her. Not every detail at first, but enough. The loans. The missing documents. The pressure. The fake statement. Being kicked out. The motel.
The text.
By the time I finished, it was dark outside, and my tea had gone cold in the cup holder. Bianca was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very clearly, "You are not staying in that motel longer than tonight." "I can't impose." "You are not imposing." "I don't have money for Winnipeg right now." "Then I'll cover your gas if I have to, and you can pay me back someday or not at all." I gripped the steering wheel. "Bianca." "No," she said firmly. "Listen to me. You have been surrounded by people who profit from you feeling confused. I am not one of them.
Come here.
Bring every paper you have." I started crying again right there in the parking lot. The next morning, before I checked out, I went through my folder one more time and made a list in a notebook. Letters, account dates, missing file notes, timelines, screenshots, bank printouts, detective contact, recording, unknown number text. I wrote it all down in block letters like I was building a ladder out of facts. Then I drove east. The highway felt endless in that late winter Manitoba way. Pale sky, dirty snowbanks, long stretches of frozen fields, and trucks roaring past with spray fanning behind them. I kept both hands on the wheel and played the same soft radio station for almost 3 hours, mostly because I couldn't bear too much silence with my own thoughts. When I pulled into Bianca's apartment complex in Winnipeg, she was already waiting downstairs in a black parka with her hair bundled into a loose braid. She didn't hug me right away. She just took one suitcase from my hand and said, "You look exhausted." "I am." "I know. Come inside." Her apartment was small but warm, with books on the shelves, a row of mugs near the kettle, and one of those soft lamps that makes a place feel human instead of temporary. She gave me the pull-out sofa, made grilled cheese and tomato soup without asking whether I wanted food first, and sat at the table with me while I spread out my documents. For the first time, somebody helped me sort the evidence without making me feel irrational for having it. Bianca was good at organization in a way my mother had always pretended to be. My mother collected paperwork because it gave her control. Bianca organized information because she wanted clarity.
Those are not the same thing.
We arranged everything by category: credit reports,
Mail,
timeline notes, bank interactions, household access history, screenshots, potential witness incidents, possible digital evidence. At one point, she picked up the typed statement my parents had tried to get me to sign. Her eyebrows lifted. "They wanted you to sign this?" "Yes." She read the line about emotional distress and possible confusion regarding voluntary arrangements, then looked up sharply. "This is disgusting." I nodded. "This reads like they were trying to create future cover." I stared at her. That's exactly how it felt. She tapped the page. "Then trust how it felt." That sentence mattered more than she knew. The next morning she took the day off and came with me to meet a lawyer she knew through work. His name was Aaron, and his office was on an upper floor downtown. All glass doors, neutral carpet, and the smell of coffee and printer toner. I was nervous the second we stepped in. Lawyers had always belonged to other people in my mind. Serious people.
Finished people.
Not women like me who spent years being treated like they could barely manage their own lives. Aaron didn't speak to me like that at all. He listened, asked precise questions, and stopped me kindly whenever I started apologizing for taking too long to explain something. "Do not rush the details," he said. "People count on victims rushing through the parts that matter because they're embarrassed."
So I slowed down.
I told him about the family dynamics, the dropout label, the missing documents, my mother's filing cabinet, Zara's access, the overheard conversation, the emails, the typed statement, the text message. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Your family has spent years undermining your credibility. Legally, that doesn't make you less credible. In fact, if it shows a pattern of manipulation around access and pressure, it can become part of the context." I looked at him, then at Bianca. Neither of them looked doubtful. Neither of them looked embarrassed for me. Aaron made a few recommendations right away. Lock down everything further. Continue cooperating with police. Preserve every contact attempt. Do not respond emotionally to threats. Do not meet family members alone. And most importantly, Request complete banking and lending records wherever possible through proper channels. Then he asked, is there any chance your school records, old tax forms, or identity documents were ever handled by your sister directly? Yes, I said. Not officially, but in practice, yes. We all lived in the same house. She had access to everything. And your parents? My mother definitely knew where all of it was. My father acted above details, but that doesn't mean he knew nothing. Aaron nodded slowly. Sometimes one person commits the fraud, and others help contain the fallout. Don't force the facts too early. Let the records do the work. That line stayed with me too. Let the records do the work. After the meeting, Bianca squeezed my arm in the elevator. You hear that, she said. You're not crazy. I gave a weak laugh. I know. I'm just trying to teach my body that. That turned out to be the harder part. Over the next month, my life became a strange mix of rebuilding and preparing for war. During the day I worked, sent follow-up emails, called institutions, sat on hold, verified transactions I didn't make, signed forms, corrected addresses, and tried to sound calm while re-explaining to strangers that yes, this was fraud, and no, those debts were not mine. In the evenings, Bianca and I sat at her table under the warm light with highlighters and sticky notes, building a master timeline. We found patterns. Applications had been submitted from devices and locations that did not match my daily life, but often aligned with windows when Zara had been home, online, or between one half-finished career pivot and another. A mailing address variation led back to an old rented mailbox service near where Zara had once claimed she used co-working space. A lender call record coincided with a day I had been in Brandon all shift while Zara posted from a cafe in Winnipeg talking about paperwork days and boring admin life, like some kind of joke only she understood. Even worse, one set of banking authentication questions had clearly relied on details from an old student line of credit file I hadn't touched since university. Only family would know those pieces so easily. One afternoon, Adriana from the bank called me directly. Her voice was gentler than usual. I can't discuss everything over the phone, she said, but you should know we found document submissions on one of the disputed products that are concerning. My grip tightened on my pen. Concerning how? There appear to be uploaded supporting materials that include copies of ID and income representation inconsistent with what you've told us. Inconsistent meaning fake.
A pause.
Meaning they require formal review. That was as far as she could go, but it was enough. Fake supporting materials. Someone had not only used my name, someone had built paperwork around it. Bianca looked up from the table when I hung up. What is it? I told her. She sat back. That's bigger. Yes. Are you okay? No, I said honestly. But I am steadier than I was. And that was true, because by then, something else had started growing in me. Not revenge, exactly. More like structure.
Routine.
Belief. I found a better contract position at a legal records office in Winnipeg through one of Bianca's contacts, and while the irony was not lost on me, the work suited me. Files, timelines, careful entry, chain of information. There was something healing about being in a place where details mattered and paper trails weren't treated like burdensome female hysteria. They were treated like evidence. It was also there that I met Gavin. He handled case intake and had one of those calm faces that never seemed rushed even when the office was full. He was not a dramatic entrance in my life. No instant music, no silly rescue fantasy. He was just decent. The kind of decent that feels almost suspicious when you come from chaos. The first time he noticed I was struggling was when I dropped a stack of intake files because my phone lit up with my mother's name and my hands went cold. He knelt to help gather the papers and said quietly, "You don't have to answer anything that hurts you right now." I stared at him. That was it. No pressure. No nosy smile. Just one sentence. Later, over coffee in the staff room, I told him a simplified version. Family problems.
Fraud.
Legal process. He didn't push for details. He only said, then protect your peace like it's part of the case because it is. I smiled for what felt like the first honest reason in weeks. Meanwhile, the case itself kept moving. Detective Derek met me again, this time with more questions and less vagueness. He could not hand me the whole file, but he confirmed that multiple financial products under my name were now formally linked to a broader identity theft investigation. Certain digital traces, signatures, and supporting records were inconsistent enough that the matter was moving toward charges. My heart pounded. Charges against who? He looked at me steadily. I can't name anyone until the process allows it, but it's real. Yes, he said. It's real. I sat there with tears pressing behind my eyes again, but these were different from the motel tears. These weren't tears of collapse. They were tears of release. The kind that come when reality finally stops being held hostage by the people who benefited from twisting it. On the way out of the detachment office, I had to stop in the hallway because my knees went weak. Bianca, who had come with me again, held my elbow. Breathe, she said. I laughed shakily. I think my body doesn't know what to do with validation. Then let it learn. That night we ordered takeout and spread the latest documents on the table. By then the evidence had become less messy and more powerful. Bank records, authentication logs, mailing discrepancies, my notes from the Christmas conversation, the typed pressure statement, the threatening text, the partial recording of Zara outside my basement room. The recording wasn't perfect, but it caught enough to matter. Her voice sang, "No one is going to believe you over me." Then, more clearly, "You should have stayed in your lane." Aaron later told me it wasn't a full confession, but it helped reveal attitude, pressure, and context. In a case built from patterns, context matters. One evening, after we had been working through the binder for almost 2 hours, Bianca pushed her chair back and said, "Can I tell you something without you shrinking away from it?" "That depends on what it is." She pointed her pen at me. "Your family didn't just underestimate you. They counted on you staying ashamed. And now that you aren't, they're exposed." I looked down at the paperwork. I still feel ashamed sometimes. Of what? I opened my mouth, then closed it. Because for years I would have said of being the one who didn't finish. Of still living at home too long. Of being the daughter people whispered about. But those things were no longer landing the same way in my chest. Finally I said, of how long it took me to see it. Bianca's face softened. "It took that long because they trained you inside it." I never forgot that either. A few days later, I received official notice that I would be called in relation to the criminal proceedings as the primary complainant and victim in the financial identity theft matter. The envelope shook in my hands when I opened it. There it was in plain language. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Not softened. Just legal reality. Victim. Not unstable daughter. Not dropout. Not confused woman who couldn't handle paperwork. Victim. I sat at Bianca's kitchen table and stared at that word until the letters blurred. Then I laughed, a strange small breath of sound, because after so many years of being told I was the unreliable one, the first serious institution to truly examine the facts had arrived at the exact opposite conclusion. When I told Aaron, he nodded like he had expected it. "When the hearing date comes," he said, "you need to prepare for 2 separate battles. The legal one and the emotional one." "What do you mean?" "I mean the legal process may validate you, but your family will still try to control the emotional stage around it. They may show up. They may perform concern. They may try to provoke you. They may still behave as if you're the problem even while the case points elsewhere." I let that sink in. He was right. My family did not need truth to feel entitled. They only needed an audience. So we prepared. Bianca helped me choose what to wear for court, not because appearances should matter this much, but because I had learned the hard way that people do attach stories to women before they speak. We picked a structured dark blue dress, simple earrings, low heels, and a winter coat that looked clean and sharp. Nothing flashy. Nothing apologetic. "Not trying too hard," Bianca said, standing back to evaluate. "Just impossible to dismiss." Aaron worked with me on practical things. Where to stand. How to answer cleanly. How to pause instead of fill silence with nervous extra explanation. How to let the prosecutor guide the structure. Gavin, quietly steady as ever, handed me a small paper copy the morning before the hearing and said, "Whatever happens in that room, it doesn't get to define who you were all along. It only reveals it." I looked at him over the lid. "Do you always say things that annoyingly helpful?" Only to coworkers I like. That made me laugh, and I needed the laugh. Still, the days before court felt like waiting inside a storm cloud. My mother left 2 voicemails I didn't answer. One was all softness. "We're worried about you. Please don't let strangers poison you against your own family." The other was harder. Dragging family matters into court is not something decent people do. I saved both. Zara sent nothing directly, which somehow felt more sinister. Then my father emailed me exactly once. "This is your last chance not to embarrass all of us." I forwarded that one to Aaron without replying. By then, Detective Derek had made it clear that the case was no longer some private misunderstanding. Financial records, application records, and supporting document issues had all gone too far for that fiction to survive. But families like mine don't surrender their false narrative easily. They carry it into every room until somebody stronger forces them to put it down. The hearing was scheduled on a cold morning with thin sunlight and hard wind. I barely slept the night before. At 4 in the morning, I was wide awake on Bianca's pull-out sofa staring at the ceiling, hearing every ugly phrase my family had ever attached to me replay in my head like a rehearsal for humiliation. Dropout. Too emotional. Unstable. Sensitive. Confused. The daughter, who never quite made it. By 7, Bianca was making toast and tea in the kitchen while I stood at the sink trying to calm my breathing. "You don't have to be fearless," she said. "You just have to be accurate." That sounds like something Aaron would say. "That's because all the useful people in your life finally found you at once." I smiled despite myself. In the courthouse security line, my hands were cold even through my gloves. The building itself was exactly what you'd expect. Beige walls, polished floors, tired chairs, the low murmur of people trying not to look too nervous. Everything looked ordinary, which almost made it more unreal. Then I saw them. My family had come. Of course they had. My mother in a camel coat, hair perfectly styled, lips pressed into that expression of tragic dignity she wore whenever she wanted sympathy from strangers. My father in his dark wool coat, jaw tight, looking irritated rather than frightened, as if all of this were simply an inconvenience created by an embarrassing daughter. And Zara, polished in cream and tan like she was attending a networking event instead of a criminal hearing connected to my name. They had not come to support me. They had come to watch. The second my mother saw me, her eyes traveled over my outfit, my posture, Bianca beside me, and something flickered in her face. Not shame. Not remorse. Calculation. She stepped closer. "Willow," she said in a low voice, "please don't do anything reckless in there." I almost laughed. Even then, even at court, she still spoke as if I were the unstable one walking toward danger with matches in my hands. Bianca moved half a step closer to me before I could answer. "I'm not the one who should be worried about reckless choices," I said. My father's face darkened. "This attitude is exactly why this got out of control." There it was again. Not the theft. My attitude. Zara stayed slightly behind them, silent, which told me more than any speech would have. She had shifted into preservation mode. I looked directly at her. "You came." A small shrug. "Why wouldn't I?" "Because, I thought. Because somewhere inside that polished body, your pulse is already starting to trip." But I didn't say it. Instead I said, "I guess you wanted a good seat." Her mouth tightened. Then Aaron arrived, briefcase in hand, and the whole atmosphere changed. Not because he did anything dramatic, just because he belonged there. Institutions recognize their own language, and people like my parents become less confident when another adult steps in who cannot be manipulated by family performance. He greeted me first, then nodded politely at the others with no invitation to familiarity. "Willow," he said, "we're ready." We took our seats. I could feel my family behind me, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel like weather at my back. And I realized something then. All my life, rooms had been arranged for their comfort. Family dinners, church lunches, holiday tables, living room lectures, private meetings for my own good. Every setting had trained me to shrink while they narrated me. But this room did not belong to them. This room belonged to process, to record, to evidence. to the exact kind of detail they had always treated as my weakness. Before I continue the last stretch, let me ask you this. What hurts more, being betrayed by a stranger, or realizing your own family built a story about you so they could hide behind it? And tell me honestly, do you think the people who mock someone the most are sometimes terrified of what that person knows? When the hearing began, everything became sharper. The scrape of chairs, the rustle of papers, the measured voices, my own breath. I remember staring for a second at the grain of the wooden railing near where I sat because it was easier than looking directly at my family. I needed one solid thing to anchor myself to. Then the matter was called. My name sounded strange in that room, formal and clean, not wrapped in contempt, not followed by some little family joke. Just my name, Willow Harris. I stood when instructed, and for one dizzy second, I was aware of every version of myself that had ever been dragged through smaller rooms at home. The girl correcting people softly, the woman crying in her car, the daughter being told her tone was the problem, the sister being warned to stay in her lane. Then the Crown Prosecutor rose. And with that one movement, the story my family had rehearsed for years began to split open. He identified the matter, summarized the financial identity theft investigation, and referred to me plainly as the primary victim and complainant whose identifying information had been used to obtain fraudulent financial products without consent. Primary victim. The words landed like something physical. I heard someone behind me inhale sharply. Not Bianca. Not Aaron. My family. I turned my head just enough to see them in my peripheral vision. My mother had gone still. My father looked genuinely confused, as if some hidden script page had gone missing. And Zara. Zara did not look elegant anymore. She looked tight around the mouth, drained around the eyes, one hand gripping her bag so hard her knuckles lost color. That was the moment. Not when papers were filed. Not when the first loan call came. Not when I got thrown out. That was the moment the truth changed shape in public. Because my family had come expecting a spectacle of my humiliation. They had expected my name to be called the way they always used it, as shorthand for failure. Instead, they heard the state itself place me in the role they had denied me for months. Victim. The prosecutor continued, laying out the framework carefully. Fraudulent credit applications. Use of sensitive identifying data. Questionable supporting documents. Patterns suggesting personal familiarity with the victim's records and history. Ongoing financial harm. Investigative findings tying access and usage to someone in close domestic relation to the victim. No one said Zara's name in that first stretch. They didn't need to. The room itself understood the direction. Aaron had warned me that hearings can feel both dramatic and oddly procedural at once. He was right. There was no cinematic gasp from the audience. No instant shouting. Just the devastating professionalism of facts being stacked one after another until denials started looking ridiculous. When supporting materials were referenced, I felt my throat tighten. Authentication logs. Mailed notices. Application timestamps. Account linkages. Records showing submissions made when I was verifiably elsewhere. It was everything Bianca and I had spent weeks arranging in binders and notes, now moving through an official channel that did not care about family hierarchies or childhood labels. At one point, the prosecutor mentioned the complainant's long-term domestic environment and the offender's access to personal records, and I could feel my mother's panic beginning to ripple outward even before she moved. She leaned toward my father. He whispered something back. Zara stared straight ahead. The judge asked a few clarifying questions. The answers came calmly. And then the thing I had not fully prepared my heart for happened. The prosecutor referenced the complainant having been repeatedly portrayed within the household as unreliable and financially careless, a narrative inconsistent with the documented pattern showing targeted misuse of her personal information by someone with close access and motive to exploit that perception. I did not cry. I came close. But I held still, because there it was. In careful legal language, stripped of family emotion, the architecture of what had been done to me was finally visible. Not only the theft, but the social setup around it. The dropout label, the dismissal, the conditioning, all of it. A lie can survive a long time inside a family. It survives through repetition, Tone, eye contact, tiny humiliations, jokes told often enough to become identity. But once it meets a record trail and a room built for evidence, it starts to sound exactly like what it is.
A lie.
When the proceedings paused briefly, my mother stood and approached as if she still had some right to privately manage the atmosphere around me. "Willow," she whispered harshly, "this has gone too far." I looked at her. "No," I said. "It finally went far enough." Her face changed in a way I will never forget. Not sorrow. Not maternal fear. It was the face of a woman realizing the old tools no longer fit the situation. Tone could not save her. Shame could not save her. Whispering about my instability could not save her. Behind her, Zara remained seated.
She would not look at me.
Then the next stage began. I wasn't required to tell every detail all at once, but enough of my evidence and documented interactions were referenced that the shape of my life inside that house became part of the public record. The typed statement, the family access to my records, the threatening message, the account inconsistencies, the fact that I had reported the matter instead of hiding from it. By the time the hearing moved toward its close for that day, the damage to my family's version of me was already done. Not in private, in public. In front of officers, legal counsel, court staff, and anyone else present who understood exactly what they had come expecting and how wrong they had been. As we stood, Bianca squeezed my hand once. I turned slightly and saw Zara finally rise. She looked at me then. No performance. No softness. Just fear. Real fear. Not because she had grown a conscience in an hour. Because the world outside our house had stopped treating her as the default truth. My father started toward me after the session, but Aaron stepped in with a kind of polite firmness that leaves no room for confusion. "This is not the time," he said. My father stopped short. He looked older suddenly. Not gentler. Just smaller. My mother tried another angle. "You're enjoying this?" she asked, voice trembling with outrage. That question stunned me for a second. After everything, she still needed me to be cruel if I was going to be right. Still needed me to be the moral problem. So I answered carefully. "No," I said. "I'm surviving it." She had nothing to do with that. For the first time in my life, she had nothing. The days after the hearing moved fast. Once public process begins, people who lived comfortably inside private distortion often fall apart in surprisingly practical ways. Calls had to be returned. Financial matters had to be corrected. Records had to be separated. Institutional reviews deepened. Family gossip, once so useful against me, became dangerous to them because the story now had a legal frame outsiders could verify. Certain relatives who had always treated me with polite distance suddenly became warmer. I did not mistake that for loyalty. It was just gravity shifting toward whichever version of events now looked safest to stand near. My aunt, the one whose Christmas dinner hallway had accidentally given me one of my earliest real confirmations, called me and cried. "I should have said something sooner," she admitted. "Yes," I said. That was all I gave her. Because healing did not mean immediately becoming available for everyone's relieved guilt. Meanwhile, my mother left me a message that sounded like she had rewritten herself as a victim overnight. "We were also misled," she said. "You know how persuasive Zara can be." That almost made me laugh. For years she had helped build the stage Zara stood on. Now that the stage was cracking, she wanted to stand beside me in the rubble and call herself surprised. My father did not apologize at all. He sent one stiff email asking whether this matter would affect the family home or their credit standing, which told me everything I needed to know about where his heart naturally lived. I never answered him directly. Aaron did. As for Zara, formal proceedings continued beyond that hearing, and I won't pretend every legal step after it was emotionally easy. Justice is satisfying, yes, but it is not always fast, and it is rarely clean. There were documents, statements, deadlines, reviews, and enough administrative language to make any normal person's eyes blur. But the central reversal had already happened. The court did not call my name as a failure. It called my name as someone who had been wronged. And once that happened, the rest of my life began rearranging itself around truth instead of family mythology. A few months later, I moved into my own apartment in Winnipeg. It was small, but this time small did not feel humiliating. It felt mine. A little one-bedroom with decent light, a radiator that clicked in winter, and a narrow balcony where I could stand with coffee on cool mornings and look down at traffic while no one questioned where my mail was going or why my bedroom door was closed. Bianca helped me thrift a kitchen table. Gavin helped me carry a bookshelf upstairs and pretended not to notice how emotional I got over something as simple as arranging my own dishes in my own cupboards. One evening, after we had assembled that terrible flat-pack shelf and laughed at the instructions for 20 minutes, he looked around my apartment and said, "This place feels peaceful." I swallowed hard. I'm still getting used to peaceful. That makes sense. We moved slowly, the way healthy things often do. No dramatic declarations. Just steady presence. Coffee after work. Walks near the forks when weather allowed. Him asking before giving advice. Me learning not to flinch at kindness. Work became steadier too. My contract rolled into a more permanent role, and for the first time since I was 19, I started looking at part-time continuing education programs. Not because I needed to prove my worth to anyone anymore, but because the part of me that loved learning had never really died. It had just been buried under obligation and shame. The first night I logged into an online course portal and saw my name beside a student number again, I cried quietly at my desk. Not because I had finally become respectable, because I had finally become free enough to choose. As for my family, consequences came in layers. Zara's polished image did not survive contact with records. People in her orbit became less enthusiastic. Some stopped taking her calls entirely. Financial pressure closed in around her in ways she had once redirected onto me. The exact legal outcomes moved on their own timeline, but socially, professionally, and personally, she was no longer the golden daughter gliding untouched above accountability. My mother's reputation narrowed. She still had her manners, her hair, her church voice, her table settings, all the pieces of womanhood she had always used as proof of her goodness. But something had cracked around her. Enough people knew enough that she could no longer move through every room as the flawless keeper of a flawless family. My father remained what he had always been in the end, a man more wounded by public embarrassment than private wrongdoing. That was punishment enough in its own way, because image was the altar at which he had sacrificed almost everything real. And me? I stopped answering to the version of myself they created. I was never the weak daughter of the house. I was the one who carried more than I should have, longer than anyone noticed, and still managed to walk into court with the truth intact. I was never just a college dropout. I was a woman who paused her own life to care for family, got repaid with betrayal, and still rebuilt one honest page at a time. I was never unreliable. I was surrounded by people who depended on me doubting what I knew. The last time I saw my mother in person was almost a year later outside a courthouse building after another procedural appearance I was not required to speak at. She stood near the steps in a dark coat, looking smaller than I remembered. For a moment, I thought she might finally say the words I had once starved for.
I'm sorry.
She didn't. Instead, she said, "I hope one day you'll understand how complicated this was for everyone." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "It was only complicated for the people who needed the truth buried." And I walked past her. No shaking. No begging. No guilt dragging at my ankles. Just clarity. That was the real ending, more than any hearing date or official record. The moment I stopped standing still for people who wanted my confusion more than my healing. So when people now ask where I'm from, I still say Manitoba. I still say I grew up in a family that loved appearances more than honesty. I still say life got ugly before it got better.
But I also say this.
Justice did not arrive because my family finally decided to see me clearly. It arrived because I kept my papers, told the truth, and survived them long enough for the truth to enter a room they couldn't control. And sometimes, that is more than enough. From everything I went through, I learned that people can call you unstable, emotional, or a failure for years, and still be terrified of the day the facts start speaking louder than they do. If you're living inside a lie someone else built around you, please remember this. Shame is one of the strongest cages they can use, So the day you stop carrying it, the lock starts breaking. Before I go, I want to hear from you one last time. If you had been in my place, would you have cut the whole family off completely, or would you have left one door open for the people who stayed silent? Share your thoughts and your own story in the comments below, and tell me what part hit you the hardest. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs the reminder, like this video, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story.